Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's now 7 o'clock and welcome to this meeting, the Finance and General Purposes Committee meeting of Biggleswade Town Council. Before the meeting starts, this is a reminder to all meeting attendees that this is a formal meeting. I can advise that members of the public will be given an opportunity to speak during the public open session, but not at other times. The meeting is being filmed, and by being present, attendees are deemed to have agreed to be filmed and to the use of those images and sound recordings. I can advise that attendees should not disclose any personal information of individuals, as this would infringe the data protection rights of that individual. May I please ask everyone to mute their microphones when not speaking. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence, and we have two apologies from Councillor Sajid and Councillor Russell. Everyone else, I think, is present, so that's that covered. Item number 2, to receive statutory declarations of interest from members in relation to, firstly, a disclosable pecuniary interest in any agenda item. Are there any agendas? No interest there. Councillor Sajid has arrived. Item 2 is non-pecuniary. B is non-pecuniary interest in any agenda item. Are there any declarations of interest in respect of that? No, there are none. I have no announcements or chairman's announcements. Item 4 on the agenda is a public open session. There are no members of the public in the meeting, either online or physically present. So we'll move on to item 5, which is the invited speaker. There is no invited speaker, so I'll move on to item number 6, which is members' questions. Are there any members' questions, please? There appear to be no members' questions, so we now move on to the minutes and recommendations of meetings. So the first one is the minutes of the Finance and General Purposes Committee meeting held on Tuesday, the 19th of March, 2024 at these offices. They start at page 5 in your pack. So I'll take it page by page for accuracy. Page 5, page 6, page 7. Is it your wish that I sign these as true and correct record of the meeting? Thank you. Items arising, I'll take it in the same order. Page 5, page 6, and page 7. Thank you. All right, moving on to item number 9, items for consideration. Item 9A, risk management. Mr. Bohr and Mr. Hussaini have produced a report which is before you, and you've all had an opportunity to read. Who would like to introduce that from the officers? Mr. Hussaini.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So essentially this item looks at, or brings, I should say, a reviewed risk management policy to committee members to have a look and discuss. Essentially, there have been no changes other than formatting changes to the document. And of course, this is the document that sits, if you like, above the live risk registers, which are routinely shared with members and updated by officers.
Thank you. Have members got any questions on the policy? In that case, you've seen the officer's recommendations. Is there anyone who would prepare to make a proposal? Councillor Barrett.
I propose that we accept the paper as delivered.
Is that seconded? There's several places. All those in favour, please signify. That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Hussaini. Item number 9B is the capital borrowing 2025-2026 onwards. That has been provided to you today. There's a copy with the papers on the desk. Would the town clerk like to present that, please?
Thank you. So what I'm about to say is nothing as in the sense of new in addition to the report. But there are some elements of the report that I think are worth highlighting to members and just reiterating, if that's okay. The first thing is just to be clear in regard to the purposes of today's report. It is not about considering in detail the emerging projects or seeking members' permission or sanction connected to how we might move forward or determining levels of borrowing or costs associated with borrowing. It is more about a statement in a point in time and understanding process, understanding things that might be considered as we move forward and make those determinations. Myself and the head of finance also wanted to try and be clearer in regard to process moving forward. And within the documentation, we've offered up a capital sign-off process and also a capital funding menu for members to consider. I hope the members will also agree that I think this is probably, we've tried to seek to do an all-encompassing paper. We've tried to present as much detailed financial information for your perusal as possible and give you the big picture. And hopefully that's helped. As you can see from page 1, and it's worth reiterating, we have a responsibility as a council to maintain our capital assets, and maintenance is a separate issue and it's a revenue item. When members get to consider the budget for the new financial year, part of that will be looking at growth items connected to the maintenance of our capital assets. And we will share that information in more detail at a later time. And then you conclude about how we might move forward. The main message to this, I think, is that as much as there's been some progress connected to this, I think there's certainly an opportunity to formalize this and to make it more professional in regard to process. One of the other clear messages, I think, from this report is that over the last 2 to 2.5 years, we've thought and considered very carefully how we might move forward in regard to developing our assets, transforming our assets, making them more attractive to the residents of the community. There are costs associated with that if members decide on that direction of travel. What we're trying to do here as officers, though, is to be ever thoughtful that actually coming to a conclusion in regard to borrowing is a significant commitment for the council and shouldn't be entered into lightly. And that the PWLB is just one of those options and is perhaps down the lower end of the opportunities as we go through a logical process. At the bottom of page 1, we've also for the first time indicated to members the gearing that we currently have. And I hope that that's helpful. I think the main messages from the gearing perspective is taking officers' perception outside of the equation here. Internal audit, external audit, BATPC and DCK look at our borrowing as part of the process. All of them have determined that it's appropriate and proportionate. There is a separate element from the accounting gearing that we can also do, which looks at commercial gearing. But in truth, when you look at the majority of our capital assets, they are not disposable. They're not liquid assets. So it's quite difficult to dispose of them and become real. Turning on to page 2, I think though in the first fig here that looks at capital borrowing, the two preeminent elements here to be thoughtful are the 425,000 that we took out in 22-23, and you can get a sense of the progress that's been made in regard to that. The second smaller portion that we took out in the old financial year, and what we've also tried to lay out is the entirety of our borrowing. When we took out the loan, what its net worth is now, and an overall sense of borrowing so that members can see that as clearly as possible. If we go back a period of time, perhaps a year and a half ago now, maybe a little bit, a year and 3/4, at the time, the council had a detailed conversation around the emerging projects that it was considering. And at the time, the council considered a high level of borrowing, particular to the information they had in front of them at the time. And I've taken the opportunity to remind members connected to that figure, which is 1.2 million. I've not done this for a reason in the sense that we should aim towards that figure. It was a position in time again, and I'm not suggesting that that be a maximum figure going forward, but it's an interesting point of reference. So in total, recent borrowing has equated to 470,000 of the 535,000 that is listed. I think a good news story within this paper is that when you look at the entirety of the recent borrowing, in other words, the 425,910, and you take into consideration all of the deployment connected to that borrowing, we now have a net figure of just under £30,000 that can contribute towards future capital projects. So I think it's a good news story that we've been able to manage all of those projects over a significant period of time. And if members will remember, there has been some fluctuations connected to specification. And even that, taking that into consideration, we now have a sum of money that can go forward and help us with other commitments. What we've also tried to encapsulate here, and I've had conversations with the head of finance connected to this, we've tried to give a sense of the overall fiscal position of the council, in the sense that as you move forward, there will be opportunities to call on our internal financing rather than going external. And one of the important things from a member perspective connected to this is to understand the monies that we have on account. As we move forward connected to this and have more detailed conversations, the head of finance and I will be more specific to you in regard to what's the net position for those monies on account. Effectively, when you take away our commitments, what are we left with, which is a kind of disposable figure that might be act as a contribution towards future funding. If we then move on to the capital reserve, I think it's important to state that at the moment, other than the emerging commitments that members have agreed, there are no known commitments connected to the 86,472, the net figure. And again, we should, as we move forward, a proportion of that could be used towards future borrowing, or rather to offset future borrowing. I won't go into great detail connected to the general reserve, because members are aware of the statutory obligations that we're required to adhere to connected to the general reserve. But again, going forward, when we have a net position, elements of that general reserve could be used to offset our borrowing, could be. The downside, of course, is if you debit the general reserve, you're obliged to put it back in the following year, proportionate to the budget that exists in that following year. So it's a temporary resource in that sense. Yep. Okay, if we can just briefly think about the capital sign-off process here. So what I'm suggesting is that the council ask itself 5 key questions that are eminent and obvious within this paper as part of the process when you go forward. And I hope that members, when we have a debate in a moment, will think that those are logical questions. But obviously, officers are happy that if there's anything else from an intelligence perspective that members might want to use to complement this, then obviously it can be expanded upon. That isn't in priority order. However, the capital finance menu of options is in priority order from our perspective. You may have a different view. The key message here, though, is that PWLB should not be that kind of automatic solution. In fact, it's probably the least attractive area of opportunity, because we're generally entering into 25 years of borrowing, yeah, which is a commitment that will be there for many years to come for the community. So we need to be ever thoughtful of that. We can have a debate in a moment connected to that. Moving on to the next page, I just wanted to highlight that under the emerging capital projects, this is a picture in time. The information, as it becomes more clearer, will go down our committee process in the sense it will be shared with our Public Land and Open Spaces Committee. The specifications will be cleaned there, and members' perceptions will be taken into account. The financial commitments associated with that will then be shared with F&GP, who will understand the commitments going forward and come to a view. And eventually, as that is cleaned, then obviously it will go to full council to make that ultimate determination of direction of travel. The information is evolving, and not all of the components are clean and tidy at this point in time. From my perspective, those are the lists of what I would call organizational change that's going to go forward over the next 3 to 4 years as an option. And it may be that members eventually come to the view that a portion of these options are not pursued. And it may also be that members' perception is that the timeline that I've indicated perhaps could be stretched or changed in some way. So please bear in mind that this is a position in time statement. What I've also tried to do is give a sense of the income associated with the opportunity. Yeah. So hopefully that's helpful to members. I won't go into detail, remember, in regard to the member officer workflow, but you can get a sense of what's happening in the background. And a good example might be Stratton Cemetery, where we're making really good progress going forward. But there's going to be a working group that's being set up and being chaired by Councillor Knight. They will go into the detail, they'll cleanse the specification, and then we will follow the process going forward. Just to finalize the comments associated with this, I think in the short term, then certainly we can offset any future capital costs by looking at our capital reserve, potentially looking at unallocated monies on account, and obviously looking at the PWL contribution that already exists. In the medium to long term, though, I think we need to develop a kind of more effective solution. And that might be that we seek to build up our capital reserve by deliberately underspending in given years over a period of time. And I think we should be very thoughtful that actually, as much as it's on the menu, the option to vary the precept, again, should be one of those things that we have to be extremely thoughtful of. And if we can think of internal solutions rather than increases in council tax, that is perhaps the preferred solution connected to all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tarrant, for a very detailed paper, and officers for having produced it with Mr. Tarrant. Members, you've all had an opportunity to consider it. Observations, please. Councillor North.
Well, firstly, I would question your assertion that we've had time to consider it. And normally we would get 3, and in fact it's required by standing orders that any paper of this, anything on the agenda is notified 3 clear working days prior to the meeting. So really the presentation of this paper at this meeting in this way is quite out of order. And so I register a protest on that point. Secondly, having a brief look at it, there do seem some anomalies in here that we're talking about things that have been specifically excluded by resolution of committee or council. There are things here that contradict earlier policies on actions, and I won't go into details here and now. And there are also gaps. There are things that have been decided that we want to do on a capital investment basis that are not included here, not even mentioned in passing even. So I have nothing else to say.
Mr. Tarrant, have you got any observations on that, please?
I guess I'd like to talk to Councillor North about the specifics associated with it. One of the things that I've been we're dwelling upon is the opportunity to write this paper and to give a sense of direction. The paper was detailed on the agenda as being an item that we were going to be putting forward. And because there are so many technical aspects associated with it, it was sent out to members on Monday morning for circulation before the conversation today. So yeah, so it was circulated at that point in time. In regard to things that might not exist in that, then I think I'd have to understand some examples. But this is not about giving absolute clean direction of travel. It's an emerging sense of direction, and there will be things that change and emerge going forward.
Thank you. Members, Councillor Knight.
Thank you. So in relation to Councillor North's point, so my understanding of the standing orders, it's required that the agenda is circulated 3 working days beforehand. It is in order for reports to come later, although I agree we should strive for reports to be circulated at the same time. So I would be supportive if members felt we should defer a decision on this until we've had a chance to digest it and consider it more. I think overall, I think it's a useful report. I think the one point that I feel quite strongly about is we have had a practice after a resolution was passed, I think thanks to Councillor Fage, so it goes back some way, where we were explicit that even once council had approved a loan application, we would not draw down on that loan application until there was a further resolution of council. I think that's an important control point because things can change between the decision to make an application and then getting very specific quotes and deciding, having a detailed specification and deciding to proceed. And I wouldn't want to lose that control point. So if members are minded to support this process, I would like to propose that we amend it to make it very explicit that a further resolution of council is needed at the point of calling down the loan. But other than that, I think overall it looks good. Thank you.
Tonight, Councillor Foster.
Yeah, I'd just like to sort of focus on the elements around the capital funding options. I think for me, there's almost a change in approach, really. I think we've a refocus on how we fund our capital spending, and the fact that maximising external grant opportunities and Section 106 are the first two items on this in this process. For me, is a real change in the right direction, and also the fact that we've, as the clerk alluded to, the fact that the public works loan towards spending or an application to that is actually at the lower end of the scale means that we are considering other options before we're committing long-term investment in that way. So for me, very positive in that respect. What it did highlight, of course, was within the report in terms of the capital reserve, there was as such, as part of the 425,000, I know you'll be aware of this, there's a £30,000 surplus, but we have invested, we borrowed 44,000 in relation to, so it's just to highlight the fact that, and I understand why, Peter, that there are sort of gaps in times, etc. So you've got to make a commitment to borrow to achieve the project. But it's just notable there, and I think perhaps just one addition in terms of the emerging commitments. They're not in terms of capital reserve commitments. They're not detailed in here, and perhaps might have been helpful for members to have a clear understanding what the emerging commitments are that have the 40,122. I'm sure that so we have £126,000 brought forward, £40,000 worth of emerging commitments. So there's a balance. So I think that would perhaps be one thing that would be helpful perhaps for members. But overall, I think good report. Really happy with sort of the approach. I agree with obviously get the report out as soon as you can, which I know you have, Peter. But as you know, we spoke about this, and I was really happy with the approach here, and recommend that we agree with the recommendations.
Councillor Albone.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the surplus that's just been talked about, so the option that's being suggested is we could consider using that surplus in other projects. But is there also an option to use that surplus to pay off the original PWLB loan earlier, if that is permitted? So that should be considered as well as using it for other purposes, I think.
Mr. Tarrant, just answer that point on the.
Yes, it's a good and valid point, and it is something that as we go forward, when we're more aware of our potential commitments going forward. Yes, I mean, one of the reasons why we summarize this is there are consequences to paying sums off, and like anything in life, when you pay off a loan early, there are consequences. But yeah, it could be used for that. Yeah.
Other members, any further comments? I think one's noted the points there. I think this is actually a process rather than a commitment to actually spend money. So this is a process that how it would work through, which, taking into account Councillor Knight's point about it being approved by council before the drawdown is voted, and I think that should probably be noted. That's, and I think it's probably implied anyway, but it wasn't obviously wasn't clear to Councillor Knight, maybe others, that that was how it would proceed.
The only thing I was going to say was I totally agree with what Councillor Knight said. And I remember the conversation that we had with the town councillor at the time, and I thought it was a very valid suggestion. As our policy and strategy develops, perhaps even the need to have that conversation might not have to happen.
There was, I think, a proposal put forward by Councillor Foster that the recommendations be accepted. We've noted Councillor Knight's point, but not sure that necessarily needs to be included in any recommendation.
I believe it needs to be, but if Councillor Knight would like it to be added in.
Would prefer it to be explicit, just to avoid future ambiguity.
Is anybody prepared to second that proposal, please? Councillor Barrett. If there's no further comment, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour, please signify. That's those against, abstentions. There's 2 abstentions. Thank you, members. Moving on, item 10A, items for information. It's set out there that the AGAR report has been submitted to the external auditor, and the notice period for the exercise of public rights was published on the 28th of June, and it was published as it's after the we've now got there. So that's a side update to what the point of information is there. Any comments from members, please? Do we note it? Everybody happy we note it? Item 10A, the bank reconciliation. You've got the report there, which has been prepared by Mr. Bohr. Mr. Bohr, would you like to make any comments or observations on it, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So according to the Council's financial regulation, at least once in each quarter, the bank reconciliation needs to come to Finance and General Purposes Committee. And I can confirm that the bank reconciliations at the end of the 1st of March 2024 has been presented to the chairman of the Finance and General Purposes Committee and the deputy chairman of Finance and General Purposes Committee on the 22nd of April 2024, and all the documents has been signed by the town clerk and the RFO. The bank statements and the reconciliations for 30th of June 2024 will be presented to full council on 13th of August 2024, and this has been agreed with the chairman of the finance, with the chairman of the Finance and General Purpose Committee and the deputy chairman of the Finance and General Purpose Committee. The recommendation is for members to please note this report.
Thank you, Mr. Bohr. Any comments or observations, please, members? Councillor Allbone.
There's a question. We've got a list of accounts here, including 2 Unity Trust ones. There is a 3rd Unity Trust one, which I guess is not listed here because it's not a council account. It's the Lindsell one, and the council is the trustee. So my question is really, does that need to be reported anywhere? Presumably not here, but does it need to be reported in any way, perhaps to the Charity Commission, or is that something we would see at some point?
Mr. Bohr?
Yep, the Lindsell's account will be coming to the Finance and General Purpose Committee, and that will be included. But at the moment, I would say we are still working on the deed. Once that is finalized, the next step is to establish how often Lindsell's report will come to the committee. But So definitely it will be coming to the committee together with the accounts.
Thank you very much.
And I think I'm also correct in saying, Mr. Bohr, that there's a note on the AGAR report that there's a charity account as well. So that gets, it's external as well as an internal side. Any further questions, please, members? If there are no further questions, is it your wish that we note the report? All those in favour? Carry, thank you. Moving on to 10C financial regulations. Mr. Tarrant, would you just like to make an observation on this and for members' benefit, please?
What we're conscious of, and the head of finance may wish to say something after I have, that the law has recently changed. The regulations do need to be updated. It's important that we evidence to internal audit that we've recognized that and that we are moving towards changing and reviewing our regulations. The head of finance has already conducted a review associated with this, but I think it right and proper that all members be given the opportunity of a detailed analysis before we debate this in F&GP. Ernest, was there something you might like to add?
I think in terms of regulation, the finance regulation needs to be reviewed at least once. So I'm still consulting with members, and at appropriate time it will be shared with all members of this committee and for consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Bohr. For members' benefit, some of us have seen copies of the new model regulations and had a look at it compared to our old model regulations. Mr. Bohr has already done a considerable amount of work in trying to bring things up to date, but obviously it needs time for members to have a further consideration and discussion before it comes to council. So it'd be premature to try and get it to council, in my view, for next week, because it wouldn't give chance for anybody to have a proper consideration. But I hope that we'll be able to get something to members a little bit in advance so that they can actually plough through it without being under too much time pressure. Any questions on this particular point, please? In that case, if we note the report. Thank you very much. Right, now we move to 13, which is the public open session. Are there any members of the public present? There aren't physically. Any online? Right, well, that's the public open session finished. Item 14 is exempt items. There are no exempt items today. In which case, that I think brings the meeting to a conclusion. Thank you very much for your time and attendance this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.